morning, and thank you for standing by. I'd like to inform all participants that your lines have been placed on the listen-only mode until the question-and-answer session of today's call. Today's call is also being recorded. If anyone has any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the call over to Ms. Catherine Hambleton. Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you and good morning. I'm Catherine Hambleton with NASA's Office of Communications. NASA's Space Launch System rocket and the Orion spacecraft returned to Launch Pad 39B at NASA's Kennedy Space Center on Monday, June 6th, after an 8-hour journey from the Vehicle Assembly Building. Teams in Florida are now preparing the rocket and spacecraft for the wet dress rehearsal activities ahead of the uncrewed Artemis 1 lunar mission. The rehearsal is the final test needed before launch and calls for NASA to practice the timelines and procedures to load cryogenic or super cold propellants into the rocket's tanks, conduct a full launch countdown, and also drain the tanks. Here to talk with us about the test ahead are Jim Free, Associate Administrator for Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate at NASA Headquarters, and Charlie Blackwell-Thompson, Artemis Launch Director from Exploration Ground Systems Program at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. After brief opening remarks from each of our speakers, we'll take your questions. So first, we will start with Jim Free.
Thanks, Catherine. Good morning, everybody. Appreciate your time and interest to hear where we are with Artemis 1, and I'll make sure that Charlie has the time to really walk you through the work that's been going on since we rolled out and what our plan is for wet dress. Let me take a minute and just add a little bit to what was said a couple weeks ago about what we did in the VAB. And we had a number of things that when we came back from the pad, we had to work on. The one leak that we saw on the hydrogen side, the team down at Kennedy just continues to press ahead and work so hard to get us back out to the pad. We fixed some things we saw around the area where we saw the leak, including going back to some of the procedures we used and the know-how from the shuttle days, which we really benefited from. Obviously, we won't know the results of that until we actually flow the liquid hydrogen at the pad here that Charlie will lay out. We also worked on some of the loading procedures. We saw some things with locks when we loaded and hydrogen that our team was actually able to go back in, and that time we had in the VAB to automate those procedures, which we know will help us during the upcoming flow. We actually got some forward work done that we had planned to do when we rolled back after wet dress. So we did some work ahead, really continued excellent planning of the folks down in the Exploration Ground Systems team, Cliff Lanham, who I know you've heard from before, with the excellent plan and keeping things moving forward to save as much of the launch periods that we can so we can get the vehicle going and understand how it operates. So again, I can't say enough about where our team has gotten us to. There's nobody that wants to get through this more than the EGS team and all of our teams, the Space Launch System and the Orion teams as well, to get this vehicle tanked, understand where we get to in the terminal count, and then get back to the VAB and back out for launch. So let me turn it over to Charlie, and she'll walk you through the details since we started rolling out.
Thanks, Jim, and good morning, everybody. It is great to be back with you again and talking about wet dress. I also want to echo some of Jim's remarks about being really grateful to the team that's worked so hard to make sure that we could get this Artemis rocket back out to the pad and ready for our next wet dress rehearsal attempt. The teams have really done a great job addressing the issues that we saw in wet dress number 3 and getting us ready for this next run. So we rolled out to the pad on June 6th. We rolled a few minutes after midnight and got to the pad early in the morning and got hard down just before 11 o'clock. Once we got hard down at the pad, we began what we call our pad validations, and essentially what that does is it confirms our services and our connectivity between the pad and the ML, and then back to the LCC, the Launch Control Center, and our command and control system. That runs across several days, and we finished up those validations, and then the next big milestone for us was getting ready for the booster servicing. We performed that over this last weekend, and so at this time we do have the hypergolic fuel load complete for the booster hydraulic power unit that provides the booster thrust vector control during flight, and we do intend to test that system inside of the 30-second mark of our wet dress rehearsal. So our pad flow is essentially complete, less our wet dress rehearsal preps, which are in full swing now. Yesterday, we finished up our booster and our engine inspections, and early this morning, we began working some of our access in and around the pad. The engine service platform was lowered away from the vehicle today on first shift, and then over second shift last night, we finished up some of our LO2 and LH2 system preps, and with that, we did power down the core stage and the ICPS. So at this time, all of the vehicle elements are powered down. The next power up will be as part of our wet dress rehearsal operations. Most of our preps will be finished up over the course of today and into tomorrow. And on Friday, we will do our pre-test briefing in anticipation of moving forward with the starting of wet dress rehearsal on the 18th. So our call to stations is on Saturday at 5 p.m. The timelines are very similar to what we have briefed in the past, and that sets us up for our propellant loading on Monday, June 20th at 7 in the morning, and that allows us to target a T0 of about 2:40 p.m. We do plan for a 2-hour test window. We do anticipate that after we get through our cryogenic loading operations, again, those will start at 7 in the morning. We'll start with core stage, and we'll move on to the upper stage loading. And then provided that we get through those milestones, then we will go into our terminal count operations. And the plan will be to count down to about 33 seconds. We will stop, recycle, and then count down again to just about 10 seconds. So we have completed many of the objectives as we have talked in prior briefings of our wet dress rehearsal, our test objectives. We hope to finish them off this time around and get through the cryogenic loading operations along with the terminal count ops. So that'll be our goal this time. It does provide us an opportunity, wet dress does, to practice all of our launch countdown operations as well as our interfaces to the other centers, and certainly we'll be doing that as well. But our team is ready to go, and we're really looking forward to getting back to this test and getting into it starting on Saturday evening, and certainly looking forward to the tanking operations that'll start early on Monday morning. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Catherine.
All right, thank you. We'll now begin the question and answer portion. You can enter *1 on your phone to be entered into the question queue at any time. Your phones are on mute now, and the operator will open your mic when we're ready and close your mic after you ask your question. As always, we please ask that you stick to one question and identify to whom your question is directed. And if we have time, we will allow our reporters to ask a second question. Okay, so first, we'll start with Bill Harwood from CBS News.
Hey, thanks, guys. Is there any scenario in which you might proceed to launch even if you couldn't meet all of the objectives of wet dress? In other words, if something came up that, I don't know, prevented something like the second terminal run or something that was understood and correctable, could you press to launch without doing another wet dress, or is the desire to get the whole thing done 100% before you press to launch? Thanks.
I mean, I'll give you my perspective, Bill, but I definitely want Charlie to weigh in. This is the first time we're flying this vehicle, and I think we need to understand everything we can before we commit to launch. I think we'd have to look at the issue and say, hey, is it something that's understandable? But my first caution is to say we're gonna understand what every situation is and run it to ground before we would press to commit to launch. Charlie, I'm sure you have a perspective too.
I think it's pretty much in alignment with what you said, Jim. I mean, to me, it would depend upon what the scenario was, what item we didn't get, and we would run it through our standard processes of going through, taking the data, evaluating it, looking at, you know, what is that residual risk that we would be taking into launch countdown, and then make a very measured decision relative to that. But it's hard to speculate without the specifics.
All right, thank you. Our next question will be from Jeff Faust of Space News.
Hi, good morning. I know you mentioned some changes in loading procedures. I wonder if you could elaborate on that in any more detail about what's changing, and also if you're making any other changes to the overall wet dress rehearsal procedures based on the experience of the test back in April. Thanks.
Well, let's see.
Go ahead, Charlie.
I was just going to say I can take a shot at this one, and then Jim, if you want to add, that would be great. Let's see, for overall loading procedures, as you know, every time we do this, we learn some things, and so we want to take advantage of that learning and incorporate it into our software and into our plans and our procedures. And so when we did our loading ConOps last time, we continued to see some pressure fluctuations during the loading ops. And so what we did is we took the data from the LO2 loading, because as you probably recall, we got the tank about half loaded, and we looked at how we could actually improve that, utilizing a series of valves, either in the upper stage valve skid or the dump valve, and how we could put into place some additional flow that would reduce that heat load overall that we have in that vertical pipe. And so that's all been included in our ConOps for this go-round. And some of it was demonstrated last time as well, but we took that, we were able to automate some of it, and then we were also able to look at some other ways in which we might be able to improve that, and again, just to reduce that heat in the vertical pipe so that we don't have that flow into the main fill stream of the core stage. And then likewise on LH2, we looked at how we loaded last time and some areas where maybe we need to begin the load just a little bit slower, again, to address some of those pressure fluctuations. We're also utilizing, and we did this last time as well, utilize the upper stage valve configuration to create a high point bleed, but we were able to incorporate some of that into our software and into our procedures. So I would say those are the significant changes from last loading ConOps.
Thank you. Our next question is from Philip Sloss of NASA Spaceflight.
Thanks. I think this is for Charlie. Will you still be conducting some of the tests that I think were noted previously that I think you were able to get in one of the previous 3 runs, such as I think the stop flow and recover test? I think you'd mentioned last time that you were able to do that, but will you repeat some of those exercises during this run? Thanks.
We do have plans to repeat the stop flow and the recovery, as well as going through the recycle operations this time around.
All right, thank you. Our next question is from Eric Berger of Ars Technica.
Hi, good morning, and thanks for doing this, and good luck this weekend and next week. Question for Jim. Can you talk a little bit about when NASA plans to talk publicly about its Artemis plans in terms of timelines and manifests for Artemis 4 and beyond? We've so far only got a pretty general idea of that, and I know people in Congress and elsewhere are pretty interested in that. And do you still expect to deliver a yearly Artemis mission cadence after or starting with Artemis 4? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. You know, we're actually right in the middle of our budget process right now. I know you know well how that works, and we're doing our 24 budget right now, and trying to fold in everything that goes into Artemis 4. Well, I mean, Artemis 3 is pretty complicated. When you start talking 4, it gets more complicated. And my goal is to have a single manifest that we talk to. You know, we kind of have these multiple manifests depending on budget year and over guides, and I feel like since coming into the job, it's a little bit too many manifests. So what I'm trying to use is this budget process to get a single manifest that then we talk to that has 2 and 3, which obviously are affected by 1, and then everything that goes into Artemis 3, and then 4 and I'll say out. Right now, really, that's probably 5 and 6. So I'm trying to use the budget process we're going through right now to get that single manifest that then everybody uses. And of course, there's some constraints around that based on how the president puts his budget together, so we'll have to work around that. But that's my goal. And that budget process closes out in the latter part of this year. So my goal is to, once we get through the agency, to be able to start talking about that in the early fall timeframe. And as you know, I'm sure with all the coverage on ML2 is a big part of that. Block 1B is a big part of that for Artemis 4. And then absolutely our goal is to get to that yearly cadence. Actually, the administrator and deputy administrator and associate administrator are all in Europe next week. And we're visiting Bremen to talk to ESA about getting to that yearly cadence. We certainly have that planned into our contracts here as well, because that yearly cadence is essential to getting the science and getting the runtime on our systems on the lunar surface.
Thank you. Our next question is from Stephen Clark of Spaceflight Now.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I want to revisit an issue that came up before the first WDR attempts back in April. I know multiple reporters had asked for things like a countdown bar chart that shows some of the detailed timeline of the WDR countdown. And I even submitted a FOIA request for this document, and the document that I got back was 100% redacted due to export control restrictions. And, you know, this is stuff that used to be publicly available and published and even handed out to reporters and public in the shuttle program. And, you know, we know NASA isn't releasing any countdown audio for the WDR, citing the same reason. So I'm interested, maybe for Jim Free, has NASA made any progress or any attempt since April or at any time in getting an export control license or a license exemption for these items from the State Department to be able to release this information?
Yeah, Stephen, thank you for the question. I think this is an ongoing thing that we're trying to work in terms of sharing as much information as we can. We actually had some pretty lively discussions this morning about it. So some of the stuff we're trying to do is have the commentary for wet dress. I think you'll see some new graphics actually that I haven't even seen yet, but I hear they're fantastic to share stuff real time. You know, we tried to do some tweeting the last time to do that. I don't know on the specific FOIA request that you made, so I'll take the action to go understand the timeline and the countdown and what we can and can't share and why. So I'm sorry I don't have an answer for you on that today, but I know Catherine will help me work through understanding that at least, and we can share it the next time I'm on with you all. But we are trying to be more transparent. Part of it too is the team, as our launch team, Charlie's team. I don't want to say our; it's really Charlie's team to give her the credit. Is working through issues that come up. We're trying to make sure that we can talk about the issues on loops, and that I'll say we have the freedom to work the issue and aren't worried about, oh my gosh, are we sharing too much broadly? So we're still trying to find that balance. Hopefully wet dress will give us another chance to learn and understand from that. But I'll take an action on the timeline for you, okay, and try and figure that out.
Thank you. Our next question is from Josh Dinner of Space.com.
Hi, thank you so much. I want to ask about the gaseous nitrogen upgrades of the pad. Does the added capacity alter anything about this wet dress rehearsal in regards to capabilities and what you'll be testing at the pad?
So let's see, I'll take that one. It does not change anything that we are going to be testing at the pad. The gaseous nitrogen upgrade that was performed, we did go through and do a test to verify that it supported all of our needs prior to rollout. We did that after the plant was upgraded, and we went through all of the flow profiles, verified all of the pressures, and also verified all of the timelines with some amount of margin to that to ensure that our flow rates and our needs could be supported during our wet dress rehearsal. So we don't anticipate any issues this go-round.
Thank you. Our next question, we'll take another question from Philip Sloss of NASA Spaceflight.
Thanks. I think this is also for Charlie as well. Previously, we'd heard that you would have a shorter time constraint for the pad flow for launch, and that there were plans to conduct operations around the clock once the flight termination system is fully installed in the VAB. Will you have a full 2 weeks or more at the pad, as we've seen for these first 2 wet dress pad flows? Will you have that 2 weeks to finish countdown preparations when you roll out for launch? Thanks.
Hey, that's a great question and very timely. We're actually just working on the pad flow schedules yesterday. So our approach to the pad flow has been, first off, if you recall, when we rolled out for our first pad campaign, we had a set of program-specific engineering tests that we needed to do for that first time. That's why we went from 15 days from rollout to call the stations for wet dress to now we're going to be at T0 within about 2 weeks. So we took several days out of the flow when we eliminated those tests because the objectives of those tests had already been accomplished. Part of our flow is based on learning curve. It is the first time that we've been at the pad, or some of these are first-time operations. And so we're continuing to look at efficiencies, things that can be run in parallel, and really how to lean out that flow and what makes sense in terms of how we group the work. And just for this particular campaign, we actually have some of the things that we worked in our preparations last time that would have been closer to wet dress that we've been able to pull to the left. So you will see some changes when we come back out for launch. I can't tell you exactly what those timelines are going to be because we want to get all the way through wet dress before we go back and adjust them. But I do anticipate that the pad flow will be shorter than this particular flow for wet dress. We saw the change from pad flow 1 to pad flow 2, and then certainly when we come back out for launch, I do envision that it will be shorter based on the lessons we've learned and the efficiencies that we've gained because of these 2 flows. And we'll certainly be happy post-wet dress when we get ready to do this again, certainly be happy to share exactly what those specifics are and how we, what that overall flow looks like.
Thank you. Our next question is from Michael Greshko of National Geographic.
For taking my question. I think this is for Jim. In previous updates, we've also been hearing about sort of the periodic efforts to, recharge the 10 secondary payloads of Artemis 1. Jim, I was curious if the agency had any updates on whether Artemis 3 would be flying secondary payloads, and more generally, how are secondary payloads folding into the kind of unified manifest you described earlier in response to Eric's question? Thanks.
Sure. So as far as Artemis 3, I think we're looking at trying to fly payloads anytime that we can. Obviously, it comes at a cost to do it, but since we're taking this vehicle to the orbit that we do and taking things to the moon, we like to take every advantage that we can to do that. So we're looking at 2. I'm confident we'll be looking at 3 as well where we can. The 10 payloads we have now, 6 of them, they're going to be charged when we get back to the VAB. The other 4 have decided for a various set of reasons to not be charged, but we're looking at their degradation, their predicted degradation of battery charge, and working with them to understand where they're at and where they would be when we launch based on setting the launch launch date once we're done with WDR. So I think that's an ongoing discussion with us, with them. But as far as I'm concerned, we have a vehicle that has capability, and as long as we don't violate the primary mission, we should take payloads with us where we can.
Mm-hmm. Just a quick follow-up. What is the current status of secondary payloads for Artemis 2?
We're still working which and what payloads we're going to fly on that. Probably once we get through Artemis 1, why don't we, Catherine, come back with what our status is there on Artemis 2.
Okay.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Irene Klotz of Aviation Week.
Thanks, Catherine. This is for Jim. Are there any updates in the Artemis 1 launch opportunities? Is the beginning of the late July, early August window still an option? And for Charlie, following on the question about the pad turnaround time, is there anything you learned from returning the stack after the first group of wet dress that affects the work that you think will need to be done between the second wet dress and return to the pad for launch? Thanks.
Charlie, why don't you go first, and then I'll follow up.
Okay. In terms of things that we've learned between the two pad flows or the pad test campaigns, there's absolutely things that we did different between 1 and 2 and that we'll do again for launch. I mean, one of the examples I would give you is the first time we came out, we had, I think I described it as we had about 5 different tests that we needed to go do before wet dress. And because of the nature of some of those tests, you know, they were all arranged in kind of a serial nature. Certainly there were preps for each of them that could be done in parallel. And so what we learned out of that was the things that really truly could be worked without interference to anything else in terms of either proximity of where the work was being done or resource limitations or any of those things. And so when we came out for our second campaign at the pad, we were able to utilize the lessons that we learned. If you were looking at our schedule, you would notice that we started some of our wet dress, some of our preps, and some of our walk downs shortly after getting to the pad, because we, you know, when we did it before, we learned that, oh, well, there's an opportunity to take advantage of this much earlier than we did prior, and so we rearranged some of the work that way. I would also offer that, as an example, the work that we just did this morning with dropping the engine service platforms. That was much closer. That work was done much closer to wet dress, but we also had some weather impacts for that. So what we did this time around is we looked for, you know, when we had the work done and the inspections done, when we could do that as early as we could, and then also look for days where we expected beautiful weather because there are some limitations with winds and other things. So those are the kinds of things we're always looking for. Where does it make sense to do the work? You know, can we do it in parallel? You know, looking at overall proximity of where the operation is being done, the resources that are applied to it. And so we're continuing, and then there's a learning curve piece of this. I mean, you know, last time was our very first pad flow with this particular hardware, with this GSE, and so we were able to, in each of our test operations, we do a post-test. We go through, we look at all of the timelines, we look at the work, we talk about lessons learned. Sometimes they're very simple things, sometimes they're bigger things, but we go through and look at how we can streamline that and how it makes sense. And so we'll continue to do that and incorporate those things as we move forward. And I would expect that we will see the same thing when we come back out. We've learned some things this time around with respect to some of our preparations and some of our servicing operations, some of our wet dress preps, and so we'll continue to fold those things in, and you'll see them reflected in our pad schedule, which again I think will be a little bit shorter than what we had this time around.
And then, Irene, to your first question, that late July, early August launch period is very difficult for us to hit. You know, I think you when you look at the pad flow and if everything goes well on Monday, by the time we would get back to the VAB, do the work that we need to do, turn around and come back and be at the pad, that'd be pretty tough. So I think we're probably looking at the latter part of August. But again, our focus is getting the team through this wet dress. But that's my my impression right now.
Thank you. Our next question, we'll take another question from Eric Berger of Ars Technica.
Hi again. There's a SpaceX launch plan for late Saturday night, early Sunday morning from the Cape, and that's within your window of call to stations, I believe. Certainly it's more than 24 hours before fueling would begin. Is that going to cause any problems? I mean, I assume not, since the schedules are out there, but just wanted to sort of see about, what you're doing with the wet dress test and the launch, within a few miles. Thanks.
Nope, that is not an issue for us. We have been able to work through, as part of our standard scheduling process. We work with the range and we work with all of the spaceport partners for our operations, and there's no issue with us and the SpaceX launch the day before.
Thank you. Our next question is from Irene Kloss of Aviation Week. It looks like Irene may have dropped out of the queue. So those are all the questions that we have in the queue, and we'll go to Jim for some final concluding remarks, and then we'll wrap up the call here in just a moment.
Okay. First, my thanks to Charlie and Catherine for putting this together, and Charlie for participating. I want to make sure that we all have the perspective of what we're trying to do. This is the Artemis program, right? And this is the first step from a launch perspective of getting us back to the moon. That's sometimes how I certainly have to take a step back and think every day when I come to work, what can I contribute and what am I trying to contribute to? And that's how I look at it. That's how I know folks who you've talked to on this call, Tom Whitmire, Mike Serafin, Charlie, Cliff Lanham, thousands of people who work on this. I hope that's what they think about, is this is the first step on getting us back to the moon. This launch has very specific objectives. It is a flight test. We want to test the heat shield at lunar reentry velocities. We want to make sure we recover the vehicle. We want to make sure the systems work in orbit. That's really what we're trying to get out of this, so that when we get to 2, we feel confident in putting crew on it. We still are pushing as hard as we can to get to the Artemis 2 and 3 dates we've shared previously with you. Obviously, as Artemis 1 has moved, those are affected. But this is, not easy, right? Otherwise, everybody would be going back to the moon. That's not an excuse. That's just a fact. This is really hard work, and this is a big vehicle. And the first time we're flying it, it's in family to where folks have had challenges before. Again, not an excuse. There's not a single person on this team that shies away from the responsibility that we have to manage ourselves and our contractors and to deliver. And deliver means meeting those flight test objectives for one, and meeting the objectives of the Artemis 1 program. So I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to work on it. I'm grateful that you all have the interest that you do, and know that sharing where we're at and how we're doing things is at the top of my list for all of you, for the taxpayer. It's important as well. So thanks for the time, and we'll be rooting Charlie and the team on this weekend and into next week.
Thank you all for joining us today. You can listen to a replay of this teleconference online by visiting the Media Resources tab at nasa.gov/Artemis1 in about an hour. And to follow along with updates for the wet dress rehearsal test, please go to the Artemis blog at blogs.nasa.gov/Artemis. Thanks again, and that will conclude our call.
This concludes today's conference. You may disconnect at this time. Speakers, please stand by.